Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. So the white media has finally decided to weigh in on the murder of Tyree Nichols. So it's time to talk about the police, right? Not exactly. The white media realizes that talking about any police harming black people, even if the thugs with badges who do it are black themselves, well, that would immediately bring us back to the vast majority of black people who were killed by white cops. So they don't want to talk about that. We see the white media on the left leading the charge to try to get out in front of this one. They see that this train's left the station and that people are already talking about it's time to punish the police. Why, even Jim Crow Joe has been forced to make some insincere noises about it. They have to make it about something other than the police, though. Notice how the white media is not bringing out the family of Tyree Nichols. They're not really eager to talk to them. Instead, they decide to bring on the police, or in this case, an ex-cop. This is a member of Congress, by the way, and the folks over at MSNBC wanted to make it clear that the fix was in. Now, in this case, it was the usual suspect, the Morning Joe show, that decided to do the dirty work. Though, of course, it was a group sport. I want you to remember that after Tamir Rice was murdered, it was Joe Scarborough and Mika the Bigot Brzezinski who went on TV and blamed Tamir Rice for his own murder. They could not wait to shamelessly repeat the Cleveland PD's claims that the orange tip had been removed from the toy gun. Of course, still waiting for the evidence on that. But Scarborough and Brzezinski were pushing that line hard as hell, talking about parental responsibility, the whole 9 yards. And then the video came out. And it showed that the police skidded to a halt and shot that child dead within 3 seconds. But Scarborough and Brzezinski's eagerness to push the police line, they did that without, how do these white supremacists put it? Oh yes, before all the facts could come out. But when the facts did come out, they validate what the black public says and shoot down the lies from the police. Now, who they brought on was some creep named Anthony Deposito. This guy is your usual NYPD punk. He gets in front of the cameras, and he makes it a point to be as surly and unfriendly as possible. The cops probably told themselves that looks tough. It actually looks as if this is just an angry male Karen. And Deposito, when he was asked about the murder of Tyree Nichols, the first lie that this clown came out with was, well, good cops hate bad cops.
Well, I'll start with this. There is nobody that dislikes a bad cop more than good cops. So let's focus there.
His first lie was that good cops hate dirty cops. First of all, where the hell is the evidence of these mythical good cops? Where are they at? When Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, there were 3 other police standing around watching and stopping the public from intervening. None of them arrested Derek Chauvin afterwards. So out of 4 police at the scene, which one of them was the good one? None of them testified against Chauvin. None of them even made a statement against him. They all backed him up. The Minneapolis Police Department, you'll recall, took Chauvin's side. Remember? Initially, they released a statement that repeated all of Chauvin's lies, and they continued to back Chauvin up until that video came out. If that young woman hadn't had her cell phone out and recorded the murder of George Floyd, then the Minneapolis Police Department would still be lying to this day and saying that George Floyd died from an overdose and that he was resisting arrest and all the rest of that bullcrap. An entire police department lied. So where are the good cops in Minneapolis at? When Daniel Pantaleo strangled Eric Garner to death, there were at least 3 other police around helping him do it. None of them intervened. None of them made a statement against him. So where were the good cops at then? When Betty Shelby murdered Terrence Crutcher, there were at least 3 other police beside her. None of them arrested her. None of them made a statement against her. The police department took her side and repeated her lies. So where were the good cops at then? When Jason Van Dyke murdered Laquan McDonald, there were at least 2 other police who were on the scene of the murder. Neither one of them arrested Van Dyke. Neither one made a statement against him either. And the Chicago PD told lie after lie to protect Van Dyke. They backed up all of his lies, even though they had the evidence against him. And they kept doing it until the video was finally made public. So where were all these good cops at? When Timothy Loman murdered Tamir Rice, his partner in the squad car did nothing, didn't arrest him, and never made a statement against him. So where are these good cops at? When Kim Porter murdered Dante Wright, there were at least 2 other police officers on the scene. Neither of them arrested her. None of them gave a statement against her. So where were these good cops at then? I could go on and on and on, but I think the point is made. You can't have a nonstop litany of police murdering people while other cops stand around and then claim the good cops hate the bad ones. We find tons of examples of the bad cops, but it's real scarce to find those good ones. The so-called good cops have had every chance there is to prove that they hate bad cops, and so far there's no examples of these good cops doing or even so much as saying anything. See, when you're on the wrong side of the issue, you have to lie. You don't have any other choice. But never forget, of all of the racists on white left media, Scarborough and Brzezinski are among the worst. But also never forget, whatever racist crap they spew, it's because their white media bosses at NBC want it out there.
But I think what we saw in this video is that we need to take a hard look at training across this nation and make it standardized. I think that's important to keep our community safe, and it's important to keep the members of service safe.
So, Congressman, I hear you on that, and I've heard many other people say that, but do you really need training to know not to beat a man within an inch of his life as he's laying on the ground? What training would have changed what we saw there?
Well, I think that there's what's happening right now is, unfortunately, many departments are lowering their standards, and it's because of the attack from the far left on law enforcement and the job that people do each and every day. We've seen it. I'll use my department of the NYPD as an example. I mean, this year alone, we've seen the record amount of exits.
It was beyond awkward the way that this clown tried to shoehorn his pre-canned talking points into this discussion. He sounded as if he was having a totally different conversation, because he was. What he was saying had nothing to do with the subject at hand. There's no way that they can put restrictions and punishments on the black police officers without also putting the infrastructure in place to punish the white ones. They need to limit this only to what happened in Memphis. That's the goal. That's the point they have to reach. But the black grassroots have made that impossible. So now the goal has shifted to blaming the victim. This Deposito clown was trapped, and he knew it. So he started spewing gibberish about leftists attacking the police. Tell me something, did the murder of Mr. Nichols have anything to do with the left at all? What did that have to do with leftists attacking the police? It was the police attacking citizens. Were leftists the reason that George Floyd was killed? Did leftists kill Tatiana Jefferson? Of course not. In order for something to qualify as an attack, you would first have to prove that the person or group being attacked hadn't done anything. You can't say that about the police. Deposito tried to say that it was about departments lowering their hiring standards, since less thugs want to be in the police. But that's a lie. By the way, just to show how close this Deposito creep is to the white supremacist infrastructure, that talking point that he was using about lowering hiring standards, I've seen that a lot online, especially the last week or so, in relation to this killing. Now, obviously, these white supremacist trash were throwing that term around long before now, but the talking point has been especially used a lot for the last 7 to 10 days or so. And they say that, well, what happened in Memphis was the result of woke hiring. Woke hiring? Of course, woke is a euphemism for black, so you have a racist Republican congressman and an ex-thug with a badge is what he is, and he's claiming that the problem is training, he says. And then his racist pals online say that it's the hiring that's the problem. So, which one is it? On second thought, now that I think about it, maybe Deposito and these white supremacists are right. I mean, when you think about who it is that comprises the vast bulk of America's law enforcement personnel, and when you think about the fact that trash like Deposito made it into the NYPD, well, that's all the evidence you need to prove that these police departments have not merely lowered their standards for hiring, they don't have any standards to begin with. Deposito is the best argument for why police departments are clearly not hiring the best and brightest. Hiring in and of itself is actually a small issue. The big problem happens to be the internal culture of these police departments themselves, which Deposito is a prime example of.
Correct. I mean, there have been departments throughout this nation that have lowered standards because they just don't have people knocking on the door to join the ranks. There are departments across this nation, and thankfully there are not tons of them, but there are departments where police officers go to work each and every day to patrol, and they could be sharing a bulletproof vest with other people that serve.
Now, he also tried to clean up his little lie afterwards by saying that he was talking about protective gear like bulletproof vests, 2 cops, 1 vest. Gee, is that anything like 2 girls, 1 cup? It probably is because both of them are full of crap. All the thugs who murdered Tyree Nichols, they had on vests. So what did bulletproof vests have to do with the killing of Tyree Nichols? Would it have stopped it from happening? What did vests even have to do with it? Would a bulletproof vest have stopped Derek Chauvin from murdering George Floyd? Aaron Dean had a bulletproof vest on the night he murdered Tatiana Jefferson. Amber Geiger, ditto. Michael Slager and every other white supremacist piece of trash who's murdered a black person. So why even bring up vests? This is what happens when you come on a show with a head full of talking points and you're so determined to say these talking points. I'm just going to get this in here whether they like it or not. You don't even consider the fact that what you're saying is irrelevant. The lesson here is, if you're going to lie, at least make sure it has something to do with the subject at hand. But you'll notice that neither Willie Geist nor anyone else, at least the white panelist on Morning Joe, checked Deposito on that. Nobody pointed out that his lie made no sense, because this wasn't about examining the issue. This was a pre-canned segment that was supposed to push a narrative. What this racist puke Deposito fears is punishment. When he talks about police leaving New York, fleeing the state, he's mostly talking about the NYPD. In fact, that's pretty much the only ones. You don't see cops in the LAPD fleeing anywhere. The NYPD has at least 30,000 thugs in their employ. Even if you had thousands of them leave, that's only a small part of the overall force. So what this Deposito creep is talking about has been a talking point bandied about by the right. You got a bunch of guys, many of them close to retirement or what have you, and they've been talking about going to Florida because that's where New Yorkers go. From Donald Trump to the crooks in the NYPD, TBA talked about that in one of his documentaries, talking about snowbirds, all of those New Yorkers who happen to go down to Florida. That's where so many of them retire to. So there's a direct pipeline between New York and Florida. That means nothing. And what he's talking about is a local phenomenon in New York, not a national one. But that's how he's going to try to talk about it. Oh, this is happening everywhere. No, it's not. The thugs in the NYPD are fleeing to Florida in the desperate hopes that they can escape being extradited back to New York. They're running from punishment because they know that people are looking into the files of all these dirty cops and asking, hey, we need to put some cases on some people. And another thing, why is it that all the dirty punks in the NYPD are a bunch of hunchbacks like this Deposito clown, this no-neck having homunculus-looking squatting over Quasimodo scumbag? Apparently, you have to be both mentally and physically deformed in order to make it into the NYPD. Nice to know. What Deposito doesn't like is that the public is cracking down on dirty cops. And we see all these criminals who are running scared. We can see who the dirty cops are. They're fleeing. But they're not scared enough from what we're seeing today. Driving the dirty cops out of town is exactly what's called for here. The only cops who don't like rules are the dirty ones. Good cops don't mind rules because they know that they haven't broken any. Which explains why this Deposito clown left the NYPD dirty as he surely is. Cracking down on the police is not a problem. It's the solution. Which explains why a bloated inbred like this Deposito creep hates it. Deposito's not angry, he's scared. He's wondering how long it will be before someone finally gets around to examining his service record at the NYPD. Because dirty cops like himself, they are the main ones who have the easiest cases put on them. The only thing more pathetic than the liars who try to run interference for the thugs in blue are creeps like Deposito who try to make the violent thugs and the police out to be victims somehow. These crimes keep happening because the police are shielded from accountability within the police departments, and they're shielded from punishment outside the departments. And where the white media is concerned, they're even shielded from mere criticism. These white supremacists in these police departments are so weak, so fragile, so pathetic. Oh, they are just the most delicate little snowflakes. You can't even talk about them without it being the end of their lives. So what possible purpose does it serve to have cowards like this around anywhere? Most acts of violence are motivated by fear, and it's hard to find a more craven, more timid, more cowardly, more frightened, and less courageous group of criminals than the police. 2 years ago, the police's violence finally provoked the outrage from the public that so many had warned was coming, and across the country, people took their cities and neighborhoods back from these taxpayer-funded street gangs. And before it was all over, the very criminals who claimed that they would never bend the knee to the woke mob, before it was all over, they were forced to take a knee. Well, now we see that they think that just enough time has passed that they can try to see if they can slither their way back to the old normal, if they can tiptoe their way back to the old normal. And the white media is going all in to try to help them do it. Clearly, they didn't learn the lesson of 2020. These acts of terrorism won't be allowed, and since the DAs and federal prosecutors are refusing to apply the law, the public will make sure that justice is done and public safety is assured. Only this time, instead of letting them get away with just taking a knee, the public is going to bring the violent thugs in the police departments to their knees. Obviously, this putrid segment on MSNBC was a pre-planned hit piece. They would bring on a Republican who they knew had been a thug in both the NYPD and the New York Fire Department, which is just as racist as the NYPD, by the way, and they would let him on and let him say whatever gibberish he wanted. It's not the police's fault. Don't punish the police. Hey, so it must be these woke mobs. Nowhere in this entire waste of time and money did anyone mention police accountability or responsibility. Nobody did that. This entire segment read like it was written by Patrick Lynch and other criminals in the NYPD. Don't go kidding yourself. They put this scumbag on the air because this is the message they want out there. They knew what he was going to say. In fact, that's what they do with all these TV shows. They got their producers who do a pre-interview with the people that they're going to put on the air just to know what they're going to say. It's standard operating procedure for the white media. And you can tell because nobody challenged him on a single word of it. In fact, they reinforced it. The appropriately named Mike Barnacle, because a barnacle is absolutely useless as anything other than a parasite, this clown has also spouted all kinds of anti-black racism in the past. And on this particular show, he tried to outdo himself.
So, Congressman, I don't think you'll get any argument here that the job of being a police officer in specific districts, specific cities, has never been tougher. You pull up to a call at 11 o'clock at night. No matter the call, there's going to be at least 6 people there with their cell phones going to record what happens. The ocean of guns that are around in certain neighborhoods.
A young black man was murdered, beaten to death, and this creep says that there's communities that are war zones, and the real danger to police are videotaping them. If you videotape the police, that's the real danger. Why? The job's not getting any easier. We know that's a lie. Policing is one of the safest jobs in America. The Bureau of Labor Statistics established that. And by the way, killings of police are historic lows, not historic highs. But this is what Barnacle tried to say. You roll up to a scene at 11 o'clock at night and people are videotaping you. Nobody says, hey, if the police are obeying the law, they got nothing to worry about. How does someone videotaping the police cause them any problems? You're not putting your hands on them. You're not even talking to them. You're documenting what's going on. In that case, Mike Barnacle must really hate the idea of body cameras or dashboard cameras, because body cameras and dashboard cameras merely do the same thing as a private citizen with a cell phone camera, except the difference is when it comes time to hold the police accountable, they can hide, and they do hide the body cameras and the dashboard cameras. They hide those away or try to destroy them. You can't hide a private citizen's cell phone camera. They don't control those cameras, so that's the problem. It's a camera that they can't control, that the white media cannot control. If you think about the murder of Walter Scott, that wasn't the white media who brought that to light. It was a bystander who videotaped that murder. George Floyd, another bystander who videotaped the murder. It wasn't the cops' body cameras, it was a private citizen who got it. The murder of Tamir Rice, it wasn't a dashboard camera or a body camera that captured the murder. It was a security camera, one the police didn't control.
At the end of all that, we do live in a nation where there is a lost legion of young men and boys who are living in combat zones, and they're largely African American, and they have lost all respect, as well as their parents have, for policing. How difficult the job of policing is. What do we do about trying to convince young African Americans and people of color in city after city that the police are there to help, not hurt or hinder?
Barnacle's putting his racist creds on full display. Well, believe it or not, I actually agree with him to a point. There is a lost legion of men and boys out there who need help. But when you actually look at the stats in the news, you see it's not African-American men and boys. The ones who are lost are the Dylan Roofs, the Nicholas Cruzes, the Peyton Gendrys, the Ethan Crumbleys. Just last week, I reported on Gavin Smith, a 16-year-old who 2 years ago murdered his entire family, his mother, his stepfather, his own siblings, including his 3-year-old brother. And I'll be here till 5 in the morning trying to list them all. See, there's your lost legion of men and boys that Mike Barnacle should be worried about, but he's not. They're the ones making it where you can't go to a movie theater, a grocery store, or even a church without it becoming a bloodbath. But Barnacle doesn't say anything about that. Apparently, he doesn't think that America's schools have become war zones, not because of African American men and boys, but because of the Nicholas Cruzes and the Ethan Crumbleys. But apparently, Mike Barnacle, who's so concerned about public safety, he doesn't think that any of those things are a problem. Young men who cannot control their impulses or their behavior, that's a generation of youth who are a lost legion. It's because people like Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski, and Anthony Deposito are the ones raising them, and people like Mike Barnacle are refusing to talk about them. But the real core of Barnacle's lie was the nonsense about how the black community can be made to trust the police. The damned insult. This racist inbred decides that he's going to take the victims and say they're the ones to blame for all this. It is not the responsibility of the black community to prove that we trust the police. It is the responsibility of the thugs with badges to prove that they are trustworthy. But that's not what Mike Barnacle says. He turns everything backwards and inside out, because you have to under white supremacy. You gotta lie. Well, the black community, they need to start trusting the police. No, the police need to start proving that they are trustworthy. Notice how that never came up. Mike Barnacle did not say, what can the police do to prove that they are trustworthy? What can the police do to start actually earning the black community's trust? Because if you do that, if you actually ask that question, then you got to say, well, I suppose a good start would be you don't kill black people. You're not sitting here kneeling on someone's neck until they're dead. You're not shooting 12-year-old children in the park. You're not shooting mothers in their own homes. That would be a good start. But Mike Barnacle didn't say that, and nobody else on that panel did either. This is what the so-called left-leaning media is putting on the air. In the midst of this tragedy, this is what MSNBC sees fit to put on the air. This is the kind of slant that they want for this story. This segment was so full of lies and racism, you would have thought the clowns at OAN put it together. But this is MSNBC. Just 2 days ago, a black man murdered, and there's no discussion about what needs to be done to punish the police. Instead, the entire conversation is racial code words about how police have lowered their standards. Well, again, considering that Anthony Deposito was in the NYPD, they probably got a point. And keep in mind, this racist creep is now in Congress. What kind of laws do you think that he's going to be pushing for? At the end of the segment, only Eugene Robinson chose to exercise more than 2 brain cells, and he asked Deposito to go ahead and explain his gibberish about lowering hiring standards, and Deposito was forced to admit it had absolutely nothing to do with this crime.
I want to go back to your original point about whom police departments are hiring and why that might have changed. Do you have information that was indeed a factor in what happened in Memphis, that these were somehow unqualified people who became police officers, or because I'm not aware of any reporting that suggests that.
No, I don't have specific information that these individual members of law enforcement were hired under any situation where the standards were lowered. Could they have been? Absolutely. What I'm saying is that across this nation, we have seen that young people who would have had a great career in law enforcement.
Did you get all that?
Well, as far as their hiring goes, I have no specific information about whether they were unqualified to be hired. But it could have been. It could have been. I don't have any information. I have nothing to back that up with. I'm just saying it because I'm not going to admit that I'm lying. But it totally could have happened, though.
So he admits that he's just making stuff up. But then again, you have to have an IQ lower than your shoe size if you didn't already realize that. Of course, what he said was irrelevant because it wasn't about relevance. It was just about getting the lies out there. It's just the same old white supremacist tactic of trying to get the racist bile out there into the airwaves. Let's try to find a way to get it to be part of the discourse. Let's at least get it out there. He just spouts this torrent of word salad. Something, something hiring standards. Something, something bulletproof vest. Something, something leftist attacks. Deposito comes off as exactly what he is. A very angry, very small, very stupid little man. You can tell he was just so eager to get his talking points on the air. He was probably sitting there just chewing his fingernails and just grinding his teeth. As I want to get on there. I'm going to say leftist attacks. I'm going to say they're lowering the standards when they're hiring people. I'm going to get this out there no matter what. You can tell that's exactly what he was thinking. He didn't even care about the questions. All he cared about was spouting his talking points, and it made him look like an idiot, or rather, it made him look like a cop. He was vomiting out this stream of unrelated words and disconnected talking points that had nothing to do with each other or with the subject at hand. And out of all the people on that Morning Joe panel, none of the white panelists checked Deposito on what were clearly nonsense and lies. Only the black man dared to show some common sense. We all know that MSNBC and CNN are trying hard to appeal to the Fox News crowd, and segments like this are part of that effort. 'Cause sounds more like Sean Hannity than anything else. Just allow the liars to come on air and spew their talking points, the kind of lies that usually only get heard on Tucker Carlson, except this time, don't debunk the lies, just let them stand. This kind of crazy talk from Deposito belongs in a psych ward. But considering that the white media is the mouthpiece for white supremacy, I guess it makes sense. The white media is a madhouse. Well, family, it's time for us to do our part and tear the madhouse down to the ground. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. D. Tubman, Elaine Zanga, Ikegas Dorset, Nadia Nduku, and Jeffrey Williams. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.